Hey friend, thanks so much for joining me here on Primetime tonight. I'm so excited to share with you guys what God's been teaching me the last couple of weeks, really. It's just kind of close to my heart at this time, and I'm excited to dig right in. Today we'll be reading from Mark chapter 14, and this is the story of where Mary anoints Jesus from like head to toe. So let's dive right in. Mark chapter 14, verse 3. While he was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, he was reclining at the table, and a woman came in with an alabaster jar, a very expensive perfume of nard. She broke the jar and poured it on his head. But some were expressing indignation to one another, saying, "Why is this perfume been wasted? For this perfume might have been sold for so much, for 300 denarii, and given to the poor." And they began to scold her. But Jesus replied and said, "Leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She has done a noble thing for me. You always have the poor with you, and you can do what is good for them whenever you want, but you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body in advance for burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." So here we find this interesting encounter of Mary where she comes into this place of where these men are having a feast, and she comes in with this very expensive jar of oils of nard, and I did a little bit of study, and it's just a variety of actually plants and spices and different flowers that grew in Nepal and China and India, and it took years to sometimes import those oils to where they were, and it was as it says here, 300 denarii, so it wasn't a cheap, essential oil. This was possibly even an inheritance or something that was passed down, or their savings account, basically, to where this was a sacrificial act. I used Mark's story because this is the only account that says that she broke the jar. And that jumped out to me the other day because she wasn't saving the jar for anything else. She wasn't going to use it later or, save some of the oil for herself or anything like that. She was going all in. This was a sacrificial, all in, no going back, using all of the oil. And also the breaking of the jar got my attention, as it would the whole room. As soon as something breaks, a lot of times, like in a restaurant, if something falls, or even in your home, it catches your attention. It catches everybody in the room, and they all look over, see what happened. And I could just imagine the breaking of that jar wasn't just, maybe she was trying to open it, or maybe she didn't even want to go through with that. She just broke it, and it got everybody's attention right away. And also the smell that came off of those fragrances and all those sweet aromas from the oil, it filled the whole room. And just like the breaking of the jar, this got everybody's attention. And so many people in the room went to each other saying, "What is she doing? She's wasting that oil, just pouring it out, when it could have been sold and feed the hungry or the poor or anything else, really. This is 2 years of wages worth. It's a lot of money to pour out." And so many people, when we go all in for Jesus, they're gonna find us crazy. They're gonna think, "What a waste, what are we doing? You guys are just ridiculous with what you're putting in for Jesus," basically, because the values of this world and the values of the kingdom of heaven are opposite, and they're always going to be in a position of each other, and people will always have something to say against it. And I believe that Mary here found the value of spending that time at Jesus's feet. And when she came and broke this jar at his feet and poured it on his head, on his feet, she knelt down at his feet and took a place of a servant. And she humbled herself. She lowered herself to the point of being at his feet. And she even undid her hair, which was socially unacceptable back then. And she started kissing his feet. She wiped his feet with her hair and the oil. And it was a sacrificial move because she loved the Lord so much. And she didn't care about how much that oil was worth. She didn't care. This was something she wanted to do for Jesus. And all those blessings that she poured out, it essentially turned back or came back to her. As she was wiping his feet with her hair, that fragrance, that sweet smell, it came back on her hair. And whatever we pour out in our commitment and sacrifice to God, the blessings always come back to our lives. And just like we see at the end of the story where Jesus says, leave her alone. Okay, she's done a great thing for me. And wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the world, this will be told in memory of her. So whenever we humble ourselves, he exalts us. Just like when Mary humbled herself before Christ, he exalted her by sharing her sacrifice to everyone who receives the gospel. And Mary may not have even known that what she was doing as a preparation for his burial, basically. But she sacrificed, she gave it all in. And a lot of times when we follow the Spirit and live fully committed to God, we may not know why we're doing certain things or where God is leading us, but in the bigger picture, he knows exactly what he's doing. And when we trust him, when we fully commit our lives to him, we can sacrificially give, not expecting to know where that's going down. And laying it all down at his feet and resting, as people were shaming her and telling her, what is she doing? This is such a waste. Criticizing and claiming that you're doing it wrong or whatever it is. Mary didn't feel compelled to stand up and defend herself. She didn't try to justify her actions. She sat there at Jesus' feet. And when we are mocked by the world for giving God our sacrifice, the world may talk and think we're crazy, but I want to encourage you to rest at Jesus' feet. Don't let the world come in and break down what you're trying to gift to Jesus. And just like Mary made it a priority to sit at Jesus' feet and listen to his pouring out, her passion and her complete faith in Christ, is such a beautiful example that she didn't care about the world and what the men were saying, and even maybe the woman in the kitchen serving, whatever it was. She just went. And a heartfelt worship and honor of Jesus never really is private. If we are truly of God and when we truly sacrifice, it spills over onto others, just like the breaking of the jar got everybody's attention. The spilling of the oil, it filled the room and people saw what she was doing. Our sacrifices and our love for the Lord should spill over. And I also wanted, I was reading a little later in the same, actually in Luke, chapter 22, I thought it was beautiful how not only did Mary sacrifice the jar, and those jars weren't cheap either, the jar itself, she could have used it for anything else, but also that oil, again, that was very expensive oil. It was something you didn't just pour out. But Jesus sacrificed even more. Jesus here in Luke 22:19, and he broke the bread and gave thanks and gave it to them and said, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, he also took the cup after supper and said, "This cup is the new covenant of my blood, which is poured out for you." Just like the jar was broken, his body was given for us. And just like the jar was poured out as a sacrifice for us, Jesus' blood was poured out as a sacrifice to us. So take example of Jesus and his complete sacrifice and completely giving it all. And take an example from Mary, to where she didn't even know what was going to happen to him completely, but she gave and sacrificed completely. Again, thank you so much for joining me on Primetime. It's just some things God's been speaking to me, and I'm very passionate about this story. I love it so much, and I love Mary. And I'm excited that God's teaching me more through this story. Thank you guys, and have a good night.